You know, the problem, the biggest challenge I see with people, anybody who has been bopping around the hypnosis or NLP world for any length of time, you ask them, I want to tell better metaphors. I want to be able to do metaphors really, really well. And I go, okay. And then I get in there and I start talking about metaphors, and I go, no, that's not what I want. I said, stories. I said, oh, you want to know about storytelling, not metaphors.
It's different, yeah.
Okay? Because they get them confused.
Right.
Within a story, you can have multiple embedded metaphors. Okay? Metaphors are simply describing something in terms of something else.
Yes.
And there are many ways to do that. So when we talk about storytelling, I'll have to go through my ponderous number of notebooks that I brought with me today, because I actually have a checklist. There's a book by Eric Knowles called Persuasion and Resistance and Persuasion. And it is basically a compendium of studies and research on what they call omega strategies. Omega strategies are resistance removal strategies as opposed to persuasion strategies. So alpha strategies will enhance your persuasion message. Omega strategies will eliminate resistance to your persuasive message.
Okay, so you're basically playing the opposites against each other.
We're going to increase the push and decrease the drag. Just like in therapy, we take out the trash and we amp up the engine, right? Same concept here. Persuasion and resistance are are the two factors that determine how quickly someone accepts your message and acts on it.
So what would be like a simple example of something omega?
Well, it depends on the context.
Right.
But if you tell a story that emotionally engages somebody, either about an object, about something, or for something or away for something, it primes them to make a decision along those ways. Another way that you can do it is to forewarn somebody about something. Like one of the things that they do, especially if you're doing any kind of public figure work, is if you have a skeleton in your closet, you tell them about it rather than having your opponent tell you
Right
about
up front, yeah.
Okay, and then when your opponent brings it up, it's like,
We already talked about that.
yeah, it's like, he's up front about that. He told us.
I wasn't always a good person, but I'm here to make a change.
I was a deadbeat dad. I got to tell you, I wasn't the best person in the world for a long time. I was a deadbeat dad.
But we all believe in second chances, right?
I wouldn't go that far. So I'm here to just tell you, I made a lot of mistakes. You can do that. I mean, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. And I get a lot of questions about eliminating resistance. I think I even did a meetup on it at the beginning of the year. I did a meetup on, because that's the time when people would experience the most resistance. Because they want to have all these New Year's resolutions that they want to keep, and they're fighting themselves left and right. And again, maybe I'll try and maybe we'll revisit that after lunch. But one of the things that, in terms of stories, is they discovered was there's this thing called transportability, which I thought was a pretty cool ambiguity. So that's how they spell it, but I do it like this.
Yeah, you do it the other way.
Transportability.
Yes, exactly.
And this is the ability to engage both hemispheres of their brain. There's like 6 characteristics that if you build these into your story, resistance to your persuasive message drops. He's a scientist, so he's going to have a different view of things. He's got to be able to quantify it. If you can't quantify it, it doesn't exist. Okay? That's the world you have to remember. You have to change your explanation of a paradigm based on the model of the person in front of you. And this goes back to storytelling. If you're sitting in front of a room full of very mathematically oriented, nuts and bolts facts and figures kind of people, and you start telling a story that has any white light dragons or whatever, yes, they'll be entranced, but they'll be like, what the fuck is, they'll have no.
It's also like 14 years down the road.
Yeah.
So like.
Being 14 years down the road.
Of when I started into really and I'm
Okay,
reading all that.
so it's important now. You can change. You can, using your language and using other things. You can make them more malleable or more amenable to a story, because then it becomes metaphor. You know, isomorphic metaphors are very, very good. Direct metaphors are very good for that. But I can't seem to find. I found a questionnaire that we use to evaluate stories, but I didn't find the actual list of characteristics. So I will read these to you. So whenever you're going to create a story, you can ask these questions to either yourself, and I would ask these actually to the people who are kind of like your focus group. You should field test a story before you use it. So when reading for pleasure or whatever, can you easily envision the events in the story? How easy is it for you to lose yourself in the story? Two big ones are absorption in the experience and focus of attention. Okay?
What was the second one?
Can you easily lose yourself in the story?
Okay.
Okay. Do you find when you're experiencing the story, do you find it difficult to tune out activity around you, or do you find yourself easily engrossed to the point where nothing outside of the story is really affecting you? Can you easily envision yourself in the events described in the story? This is called the Thorndike effect. Can you easily envision yourself within the events described in the story? We instinctively identify with one or more of the characters in any given story, and we go along for the ride as that person. Okay. Can you get mentally involved in the story? Does it cognitively engage you? Does it get you thinking? Does it get you, wondering what's going to happen next, or how could they do that, or those kind of things? Once you finish the story, how easy is it to put that story out of your mind? How long does it take you to actually stop thinking about it? And again, these are questions you would use to evaluate the story, so keep in mind that you could probably distill these down to some core characteristics, most of which have everything to do with the definition of trance, by the way. Do you sometimes feel as if you are part of the story? Some of these seem a bit redundant, but how impatient are you to find out how the story ends? That's another thing that's really, how does it draw you forward deeper into the story? Does it pick up speed? Does it make you want to know the climax? How, those kind of things. Can you find that how easily do you take the perspective of the characters in the story? This goes back to relating to the characters. Can you see where they're coming from or feel where they're coming from? And how easily can you shift in those areas?
The stories that they start and then you won't have that story happen again for 4 chapters, it drives me crazy.
Oh yeah, you
I'd have to, go ahead
you would
and,
hate Game
read
of
it.
Thrones. You would hate the Game of Thrones. Every other chapter is somebody else.
I'm just finish the one story, go to the next one.
She's very procedural. You know how to really screw her up? I'll tell you tomorrow.
I'll just adapt.
I'll adapt. Okay.
I just let go. What happens is I don't care anymore and I put the story away and that's it.
The lady doth protest too much, methinks. Okay. I have.
Regain the story.
What's that?
Regain the story.
Yeah. Start at the back.
Go backwards.
I actually used to do that quite often. Is I would read the book backwards. I don't know why. I just actually found out one of the guys that was one of my mentors would actually do that too. He would actually read the books in reverse. Let's see. How emotionally affected are you by what you've read? So I think, just as an aside here, we can see right away that the story has to create absorption.
Yeah.
Okay? It has to create a focus or a narrowing focus of attention, which satisfies our definition of trance. It has to be mentally engaging. It's got to stimulate you to think about the story. Okay? And it also has to be emotionally engaging. And then it has to pull you forward, draw you, get you in, you want to find out what happens next.
It almost seems like the other piece that was over and over again is you have to be, kind of be able to put yourself in that
Yeah.
space.
How easy can you identify with the characters in the story? If you create a story about a single mother, 35 years old, with 3 kids living in Harlem, and I'm talking to a room full of middle-aged, middle-class businessmen from Brooklyn, or Manhattan, or whatever, how much identifying are you going to have with the characters in that story? Okay, that's where isomorphic metaphor becomes very important. If your story is about a 35-year-old African-American mother of 3, regardless of where she works, regardless of what city you're in, but you're talking to that primary demographic, there's going to be a click. Okay? Now, that goes into some social influence principles that we should probably understand, which is when people identify themselves as a group, they don't identify themselves as a 35-year-old middle-class African-American mother of 3. Okay? They actually classify themselves as a subgroup of that set. Okay? So they'll have the general classification and then a smaller subgroup within, or sub, they call it sub of X. Okay? So when you're dealing with people, you have to understand that depending on where in the, this gets real complicated, and I'm not sure I want to go into it, but for some reason it kind of jumped out there. It's always a little better to get a little bit more specific than to go too broad when you're dealing with creating stories and metaphors.
But not to the individual.
No.
Find the lowest subgroup you feel comfortable with.
That you can obviously see that they can identify with. 35-year-old working class moms, maybe 35-year-old working class moms who are trying to start their own business. See how it starts to get a little bit more, oh, I can identify with that.
So you can actually go back and forth between being very finite to the, from a macro to a micro level.
Yeah, and the more targeted you can make your stories, the more impact they're going to have.
So
But if you get too specific, then you rule out a lot of people who may fall within your demographic or target demographic. So that's important.
So like, for example, you could, just using our example, it could be 35-year-old woman trying to start a mother, trying to start a business, and then like with a special needs child, like might go too specific
Yeah,
to where people can't, not everyone can relate to that.
exactly.
but you can always draw it back and go back to where you were back before. So you can use that as an example and then go back and
then we get into
include everybody.
Then we get into the same conundrum we have when people are trying to use hypnotic language, and they get confused between description and specificity.
Okay.
When people try to be, if you want to be hypnotic, be vague. If you want to be, if you want to be compelling and absorption, be descriptive. The problem is when you get too specific in your descriptions, and all of a sudden people, the representations people have in their head don't match what you're describing.
So they tune out.
So they tune out, and they divorce themselves from it because it doesn't fit them anymore. So the balance you have to strike is being descriptive and vague enough that people can plug themselves or their experience seamlessly into what you're describing, but not so specific that it doesn't match their internal experience or how they see themselves.
So when you're telling stories about yourself, though,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a specific experience,
Mm-hmm.
but you just keep connecting it into like broader concepts that they can like engage in
Yeah,
and
you
get
can.
more specific again?
You can. Like for instance, if I'm talking to somebody about something I want them to experience on the inside of their head, and I say, and that blue car in your head, it's like, huh? Right? That doesn't match your internal experience. You know how you drive it in your car? Right? You're cruising along and everything's feeling good, and your favorite song can go on, and you get all these cool feelings, you know, right? As opposed to you're driving along in your blue car, and
You heard this song.
your favorite song comes on the radio, and you're like, you don't want to, you know, and it's this song,
Right, exactly. Too specific.
it's boom. You know, and I say, I'm talking about the Captain and Tennille, or, you know, and you're like, huh? So there's a balance that you have to strike.
Mm-hmm.
And the yardstick I use is, can they disagree? Can they mismatch
Yeah.
what I've said?
Okay. So you're trying to create the middle, so you're making them create their own mental image.
But I want
Instead
their
of
mental
going-
image to be exactly what I want it to be in their, by doing it their way.
But they're in their way.
Mhm.
So they're filling in the blanks, and you just going along and just being the guy.
I give them the empty outline, and they fill it in. The metaphor I like to use is actually the empty word concept. This is a clear plastic bottle, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's holding liquid. The liquid happens to be clear. Therefore, the color of the bottle is clear. But if I were to take it and fill it with orange juice,
It'll be orange.
it would be orange, but it would still be the same bottle, the same shape. If I filled it with coffee, it might be warmer, but it would be dark brown. But has the bottle changed?
No.
That's the kind of wordings you want to use. Words that sound amazingly concrete and specific, but the person fills in with their own content. Because they fill it in with their own content, it's
Mhm.
native to their internal environment, they cannot and will not resist it. Okay? It feels right to them.
Well, and that's why, you hear politicians saying like, well, we gotta do what's right, we gotta be fair. By whose definition, right? You fill it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all want to do the right thing.
Right.
You know what that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds amazingly specific, and the minute you hear it, you fill in your own content, you attach it to what I've said, and you think that's what I told you.
But then, I mean, couldn't you cross what your expectations are then? Because they're gonna be filling in their own, how are you gonna get them on the same track? as you?
Exactly. That's where the art comes in.
Giving them just enough
But you have to
specificity.
understand at a very micro level, well, not a micro level, but at a very functional level, what the process you're using is.
Mm-hmm.
And then the outcome to which you aim those techniques or those principles, that's on you and your ability to work within these systems. But the parallel is that when we're creating a story, we want to have that same balance. The more description we give, the more engrossed we become. But if there's a way that they can mismatch the story, then we have to modulate that. We have to manage that. Okay? Now, sometimes it's a good thing to have stories that go against the audience expectations. Because if the story is compelling enough, it will in fact cause them it will prime them, for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
to begin to think along those lines. It will shift their perspective.
Get them
So-
into it.
So at the beginning, you can make it so that people fill in their own answers in the story, and then as the story progresses over pages, you start being more defined because people are getting so engrossed into it because
Yeah.
they're just going down the
You
rabbit
can lead
hole.
them degree by degree by degree into a 180-degree turn,
Mhm.
which is what happens in a lot of movies, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then you get them in rapport first, and then you can start doing.
You take them where
everything
they're
else,
at.
So, yeah.
Lead them subtle degrees. This is the whole point. This is where NLP loses it. They try to make somebody going south and make them do a 190-degree shift north right away. It'll never happen. Not without a gun. Okay, and only as long as you have the gun. But if you take them 1 degree at a time, the degree of change doesn't seem like all that much. It's kind of like when we do bucket listing. right? You have the worst thing, you have 0. And then degree by degree by degree, you move up the therapy scale or the effect scale. The only degree of difficulty is only ever a factor of 1, subjectively, right? But by the time you've hit the end of it, you're dealing with things on a 10 scale as easily as you dealt with things on a 1 scale, because you did it incrementally.
So it's more of a strategy, like a long-term, where are they heading? And then you have to slowly make those adjustments.
Well, it is strategy.
Yeah.
Techniques are no good without strategies. You know, I mean, in the world according to David, you have principles and theories, you have techniques, you have tactics, and you have strategies. Strategies are the big picture. How are you going to employ your tactics? What techniques are going to be used in that tactics that you're applying to achieve your overall strategy? What are the principles that are guiding and creating all of those tactics and techniques? So you have to understand the principles, but then you need techniques in which to apply them. And then the series of techniques that you use become your tactics. And they fit into your overall strategy. You can think of tactics as just a strategy within a strategy, and your overall persuasion goal. So you have to start with the outcome, and then take other factors into the mix, like environment, culture.
So, so basically you're going backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So you start at the end. You know, justify means the end, more or less.
Well, we don't. Well, again, end justifies the means. Ultimately, yeah.
Okay.
You know, but I would say the ends. Yeah, I don't like to use the word means. I like methodologies.
Methodology. Okay.
You know, but again, you have to balance that with what you are willing and unwilling to do. Because certain tactics have ramifications, and you have to be willing to accept those. You know. But in the realm of persuasion and influence, there are people with very flexible ethics and morals who have no problem using certain tactics. And even if you're one of the good guys, you better know how to use those tactics, because if you don't know how to use them, you don't know how to defend against them. It's that simple. Okay? When I teach knife defense, I don't teach knife defense. I teach knife fighting. Because until you know how to fight with the knife, you don't know what that fuck can do to you.
It's all metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the martial arts are just thinking about how could you use it in the real world. It's a metaphor of how they can deal with things that are. That's pretty cool.
It's a direct metaphor, actually. Probably one of the most effective ones that I've come across. Getting back to this checklist, we're closing the loop now. You have vivid images of the characters. So vivid mental imagery tends to be very compelling, very engrossing. Again, leads to absorption. Do you find yourself thinking of what the characters may be thinking?
So that's really where you're in there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're part of the world. Do you find yourself accepting events that you might otherwise have considered unrealistic? Do things suddenly become plausible? If the moon really were made of green cheese, why would it be made of green cheese? Do you find yourself thinking of other ways the story could have ended? Again, this goes back to being cognitively or mentally engaging. We're thinking about the events of the story. We're pondering them. We're playing with them in our mind. If that person had just done this, it would have been totally different. You know?
And then we're so bought into that we're even just going through all the possibilities. Makes sense.
Okay.
So that's really just another measure of absorption, right?
They're all really just aspects of the absorptive experience.
Right.
But it's hitting you on the visual or the imagery level, the emotional level, the cognitive level,
Right.
and the desire to find out what happens next, and the identity level, because we want them buying into and identifying with the characters in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And as they go through the emotional roller coaster and transformation, they can't make sense of the story without going through the transformation process themselves on some level.
So it depends how real is real.
And it makes sense, like the wounded healer, like if anybody's ever gone through something, there's like a break, which means there's a possibility of total
Mhm.
change of track or a different way of thinking, and you can build from there, which is what naturally happens anyway.
The hero's journey is really a study of the universal metaphors of transformation that we all go through from cross-culturally. We go through these stories. There's a book, I didn't bring my nook with me, it's called Save the Cat. And it's a book on the universal plot lines found in movies. Last name by Blake Snyder. No relation. But it's well worth reading to understand universal plot lines, how they relate to the hero's journey, and how they can be used effectively for persuasion. But again, it's a book about films. As you're going through the story, how often do you find your mind wandering, as opposed to
Rapt attention.
being just, locked in? Somebody's, stapled your head to the page or something.
So that's really focused then, right?
You find yourself feeling what the characters feel. Next question. Do you find that the events in the story are relevant to your everyday life? How directly are the elements in the story of things that you experience? Are you, in fact, a 35-year-old mother of two with a special needs child? Right?
Where
Yeah.
have you ever been?
Well, that's why I think, like, who is it who always talks about Sarah Palin? Like, when she always talks about that, it doesn't resonate.
Yeah,
For-
exactly.
For me, and I always think in my head, like, why is she talking about this?
Because she's not talking to you.
Yeah.
And then you have to understand that that's a lot of what the politics is about. People vote for people who are like themselves, right? Okay, the more like somebody we can become, the more they like us back.
But, I mean, a lot of people are looking for direction, so if you're really strong in yourself, then they are also drawn to that too.
They can be, as long as they find something within you that they want or they resonate with.
They have to relate to you.
And if they can't relate to you, you're going to spend a lot of time alone.
Because I go around the world, I'm learning now in the last year about being, I never realized how much I was in my world, not realizing that, but I've had a lot of people connect to me in my life, a lot.
Yeah.
So, but I was just in my own space, not like
Yes.
trying to go out there and connect or anything, and just tons of people come
Yes,
along.
they connected with you, but there was still a connection.
Yeah.
There was still, they could relate to you in some way as somebody they either saw as being similar or having something that they wanted. Okay?
I've never
It's that.
ever thought of it in those terms, yeah.
That's what it is. Okay? At our core, we're still reptilian. Okay? A friend, foe, higher status, lower status, social need, they're all survival desires or traits. Okay? But if you can be the most charismatic leader on the planet, and if the person you're trying to speak to has nothing, you have nothing that they want or can identify with, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to convince that person to do what you want them to do. Okay? There has to be the identity process. There has to be a synchronization or connection, something that they want or need or have experienced that you share. Okay? You find yourself, well, okay, I did that one already. Do you often find that reading stories has an impact on the way you see things? Right?
So That's more of a question for your life, not necessarily for the story.
I would try and tailor the question to the actual story. Did you find that after you read the story, you saw things a little bit differently than when you did before you started reading it?
The story affects how you see
Yeah.
things,
You know, if you're reading a story about a single mother of two who went on to do some unusual things and became very wealthy as a result, whether you were a 35-year-old single mother of two or not, did your perspectives change
Right.
as a result of the story?
So, how much of a shift?
Mm-hmm. And isn't that really what we're using stories for anyway? To get people to see things in a certain way? Or to predispose them to see things in a certain way? Again, and that question 19 is very, very direct. How easily do you identify with the characters in the story?
Mm-hmm.
See how a lot of this comes back to the same core sets of things over and over again? And again, the last one is, do you have vivid images of events in the story? So you see here, again, you have vivid mental imagery, you have emotional engagement, you have cognitive or mental engagement, you have a strong desire to find out how the story ends, what comes next, which also leads to absorption, and how completely engrossed or focused are you on what's happening in the story that you tune out everything else in the external environment. Okay? So these would be the things that we would want to really pay attention to.
So if you say that, like, as an example with love, if people just experiencing, like, how deep that connection is, they're just going into deeper layers of trance.
Oh, sure. Everything we do is a trance state. There is no baseline state from which everything else deviates. Okay? The states we're in at any given moment are a constellation of our physiology, the thoughts we're thinking, the environment we're in, and the emotions we're feeling.
So there's really no normal then?
No. There's only a subtle fluctuation of consciousness from one polarity to the other in a seamless way that is context dependent. And those shifts will have varying degrees of absorption, narrow focus, and will give us access to certain abilities and resources and cut off access to others.
But wouldn't you think, like, if you look at it as a scale, that probably most people, maybe the majority of their time kind of fall into one general zone?
Of course.
Yeah. So I would think too.
But within that general zone, you have two ends of the spectrum, don't you?
True.
So where are they? You never know, because they're never there for the same length of time. You're constantly fluctuating. It's your ability to manage that fluctuation, to decide at any given moment, this is where I'm at, this is where I need to be, I'm here.
It's like almost like the Heisenberg principle. Like, if you can measure it, then you don't know where it is.
Yeah.
And if you don't know where it is, then you can measure it. Something like that.
I'm not up on Heisenberg, but I'll take your word for it. But again, when it comes to story, these are the criteria that you want to, A, build into your story, and B, if you're going to use this in a public forum, you might want to, create a focus group or something and tell the story and have people gauge or rate the story based on the questions I just gave you. And that'll give you an overall idea of the effectiveness of that story. You take it back to your drawing board, tweak it some more, do it again, and see if the scores go up.
So are you logically, like, thinking all of this out while you're presenting all the time? Or you
No, this is
just
done
kind of
before
go-
you present the story.
Okay.
You create a story, it's like, okay, what's my outcome? What's a good metaphor that would parallel the process I want these people to take? How do I build these elements in to make it more engaging, engrossing? So you start with the end first. Then you go to the beginning, and then you fill in the middle. Okay? Because that's the two things you know about a story at any given moment. Okay? Especially if you're going to create one. You know how it ends. What you want. You want the decision for them to make, the action for them to take. How did they get there? And of course, course, you know where they're starting. What happened in the middle? Right? If you're taking in terms of therapeutic metaphors, you know they have a problem here. You know where they want to go. What happened in the middle? Right?
That's where they get lost, is that it's a journey. Like, they think it's like instant. It's like, how long did it take you to get into this space? You know, things can happen, change can happen in an instant, and also at the same time to like recreate your whole world in a way that accepts all those shifts takes time. And they get lost in that, you know.
As we discovered, time is infinitely malleable.
So what I was telling my dad the other day, I did the, I'm not sure what you call it, where you spin the thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and because he's a little overweight, he's trying to lose weight,
Mhm.
and he's worried about like portion size.
Portion control, okay.
Yeah. And he's like, you know, I've been doing this thing for 64 years, this and that. It seems so hard to change. I said, well, your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
There is no time. He's like, you know, and he's like, oh, I guess that makes sense. So, you know, but it's true.
He's already in trance.
It's true. It's like,
yeah, that makes sense. They're in trance. Start
like-
talking.
He's like, yeah, well, exactly. You know, it's just funny because it's like, he doesn't know. He doesn't care how long you've been doing something. He has no idea.
Storytelling.
Story time. Does that help you guys in terms of telling stories?
Mm-hmm.
Now, your CPI language will catapult all the elements
Right.
Mhm.
of this particular transportability scale,
Right.
for lack of a better word. So anything you use within, you know, created from CPI language becomes inherently more absorptive, narrows focus, and creates compelling mental imagery. But again, start with the end. Because
So where do you want him to go?
Yeah, you know, and work backwards.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, start doing that. Start writing some stories.
So, did we cover what you wanted to go over today?
Actually, I came in with an open mind.
Wow.
Yes.
Open mind.
Open mind. It's open brain surgery.
So we're just gonna download into it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
You guys having fun with this mastermind?
Mm-hmm. It's my second one, I think.
All right, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back
Okay.
and we'll start jumping into some of this other stuff.
Okay. Cool. Sweet.